The smell of mustard oil and fried hilsa always signaled Kaku's arrival. In our sprawling, crumbling joint family house in the outskirts of the district, Kaku was the sun around which my childhood orbited. He wasn't my biological father. He was a distant uncle who rented the corner room, but he treated me like his own blood. He was a fishmonger by trade, a man of salt-crusted skin and a booming laugh that could shake the dust off our old rafters. Every evening, he would return from the bazaar, his lungi stained with silver scales, and pull a crumpled paper packet of sweets from his pocket. "Molu, come see what the river sent for you today," he would call out, his voice a gravelly warmth. I would run to him, dodging the hanging laundry in the courtyard. "Is it sandesh, Kaku, or the crunchy jalebis?" "Better," he'd wink, handing me the treat. "It's the sweetness of a day's hard work. Eat up, little bird. You need to grow strong so you can look after this old man when his bones turn to glass." "You're never going to get old," I'd say, my mouth full of sugar. He would laugh, ruffling my hair with a hand that smelled of river mud and scales. "We all go back to the water eventually, Molu. But as long as I'm here, nobody touches a hair on your head." That safety shattered on a Tuesday. The humidity was a physical weight, the air thick enough to swallow. Kaku had come home early, complaining of a tightening in his chest. By mid-afternoon, the house was pierced by a sound I will never forget. A wet, guttural scream that didn't sound human. It was the sound of a throat tearing itself open. We found him on the floor of his room, his eyes rolled back so far only the veined whites showed, his fingernails clawing deep grooves into the wooden doorframe. He died before the doctor could even pick up his bag. The funeral was a blur of white fabric and the cloying scent of incense. But it was Kakima, his wife, who truly unsettled me. While the rest of the house wailed, she sat in the corner of the courtyard, her spine a rigid line of ice. She didn't shed a single tear. Her eyes, usually dull, were now sharp and fixed on the doorway of their room. "Kakima, do you want some water?" I asked, trembling as I approached her 3 days after the burial. She didn't look at me. Her voice was a dry rasp. "He's not gone, Molu. You can't bury a hunger like his. The earth won't take him." "What do you mean?" I whispered, a chill creeping up my neck despite the heat. "The rituals," she muttered, finally turning to me. Her pupils were tiny pinpricks. "There are ways to keep the thread from snapping. He loved this house. He loved you. Why should a little thing like death change that?" "Ma says we have to let him rest," I said, backing away. "Rest is for those who are finished," Kakima said, a terrifying smile stretching her thin lips. "He isn't finished with you yet." Over the next week, the house changed. The air in the hallway leading to their room grew stagnant and smelled of stagnant pond water. I began to notice things, small, disturbing things. Kakima would leave a bowl of milk and rice under the old iron chair in my room every night. When I asked her why, she simply said the house spirits were hungry. One night, I saw a cockroach the size of a thumb scuttle into the bowl, its legs drowning in the white liquid. And instead of cleaning it, Kakima watched it with a look of intense devotion. "Why is the chair moved, Ma?" I asked my mother one morning, pointing to the heavy iron seat that usually sat by my window. It was now tucked into the corner, facing my bed. "The floor is uneven, Moulvi," Ma said, though she looked tired, her eyes darting toward the hallway. "Stop overthinking. You're grieving. We all are." "But I heard it moving last night," I insisted. "A long screeching sound, like metal grinding on stone." "It's the wind or the house settling," Ma snapped, her voice trembling. "Go do your lessons." The first encounter happened on a Friday. The moon was a sliver of bone in the sky. I was drifting in that thin veil between sleep and wakefulness when I felt it, a weight at the end of my bed. Then a hand. It was cold, not the cold of ice, but the cold of a cellar, a damp, subterranean chill. It rested on the crown of my head. The fingers were thick and calloused, familiar in their shape, but terrifying in their temperature. I froze. My breath hitched in my lungs, turning into a jagged stone. I forced my eyes open. The room was bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the dim nightlight. There, sitting on the iron chair that had been pulled right to the edge of my mattress, was Kaku. He wasn't the man I remembered. His skin was the color of a bruised plum, bloated and glistening with a thin sheen of moisture. The smell hit me. Rotting fish, mud, and the sour stench of the grave. His eyes were wide, unblinking. The whites shot through with burst red vessels. He didn't move. He just stared, his hand heavy on my skull. "Kaku?" I breathed, the word barely a puff of air. He didn't answer. He just sat there, the iron chair groaning under a weight that seemed far greater than a human body. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying, screaming internally until the sun broke through the shutters. When I looked again, the chair was empty, though a damp, dark patch remained on my pillow where his hand had rested. "Ma, he was there! He was in my room!" I screamed the next morning, clutching my mother's arm in the kitchen. Ma dropped the ladle, the lentils splashing onto the floor. "Moulvi, stop this. It was a dream, a nightmare brought on by the fever." "It wasn't a dream. Look at the chair. Look at the floor." "There is nothing there but dust," Ma said, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. She grabbed my shoulders, shaking me. "Your Kaku is in the ground. Do you hear me? In the ground." But that night, he came back, and this time he spoke. The screech of the iron chair waking me was louder, a piercing, metallic wail. I opened my eyes to find him leaning over me. His face was inches from mine. I could see the way his skin was peeling in translucent strips, revealing the dark, blackened meat beneath. A thick, grayish fluid leaked from the corner of his mouth, dripping onto my collarbone with a soft splat. "Moulvi," he wheezed. The sound was like dry leaves being crushed. "It's so cold where I am. The water is so deep." "Please," I sobbed, my voice cracking. "Go away. Please, Kaku." "I brought you something," he murmured, his bloated tongue licking his gray lips. He reached into the pocket of his tattered, wet lungi and pulled out a handful of what looked like silver coins. As he dropped them onto my chest, I realized they weren't coins. They were fish scales, wet, slimy, and smelling of decay. "You liked the treats I brought, didn't you? Eat Eat, Moulvi, eat and come with me. I don't want to, I wailed, the sound muffled by my own terror. The river is waiting, he whispered, his hand sliding down from my head to my throat. His grip was firm, the skin of his palm feeling like wet leather. Kakima told me you were lonely. She told me you missed me. I won't leave you here in the heat. We'll go where it's cool, where the scales never dry. He began to climb onto the bed. It was a slow, agonizing movement. I heard the schlick of his wet skin sliding against the bed sheets. The mattress dipped violently under his mass. He wasn't walking, he was crawling, his joints popping with loud, wet cracks. Ma, help me! I tried to scream, but the sound died in my throat as his cold, bloated body pressed against mine. The weight was immense, like being buried under wet earth. I could feel the individual ribs of his chest pressing into my stomach. He smelled of the bottom of a stagnant well. His face hovered over mine, his jaw unhinging slightly, a low, rhythmic thrumming vibrating deep within his chest. Just a little further, he croaked, his breath a cloud of miasma. Just a little walk to the water. The bedroom door slammed open. The light from the hallway flooded in, harsh and white. Ma stood there, her face a mask of horror, holding a heavy brass lamp. Behind her stood the village Moulvi, a man with a long white beard and eyes that seemed to see through the shadows. "In the name of the Almighty, leave this child!" the Moulvi roared, his voice cutting through the stagnation like a blade. The entity on top of me shrieked, a sound that vibrated in my very marrow. It wasn't Kaku's voice anymore. It was the sound of 100 drowning men. He scrambled backward, his movements a blur of distorted limbs, his body hitting the iron chair with a crash that shattered the wooden floorboards beneath it. The Moulvi stepped into the room, chanting in a rhythmic, powerful cadence, throwing water from a small silver bowl. Each drop that hit the shadow seemed to sear it. I saw the shape of Kaku dissolve into a gray mist, the smell of rot replaced by the sharp, clean scent of burning oud. "Get her out of here," the Moulvi commanded. Ma grabbed me, pulling me from the bed. I was covered in the wet, gray slime he had left behind, the fish scales sticking to my skin like armor. We huddled in the courtyard as the sounds of a struggle echoed from my room, the crashing of furniture, the screeching of metal, and finally, a long, fading moan that seemed to sink deep into the earth. Hours later, the house was silent. The Moulvi emerged from my room, his forehead beaded with sweat. He held a small, leather-bound amulet and a vial of dark oil. He was tied to this place by a love that turned into a rot, the Moulvi said, his voice weary, and by the meddling of one who should have known better. He looked toward Kakima's room. She was gone. She had vanished into the night, leaving behind only the empty bowl of milk and a pile of black ash in the center of her floor. "Is he gone?" Ma whispered, clutching me to her chest. The door is closed, the Moulvi said, handing her the amulet. Tie this around her neck. Do not let her sleep in that room again. The chair must be melted down. It served as his anchor. I was sick for weeks after that. A high, delirious fever that made me see scales every time I closed my eyes. They moved me to the main part of the house, into a bright room with many windows, but the shadows still felt heavy. Years have passed since that night. I am no longer a girl, and the joint family has fractured. The old house sold to developers who will surely tear it down to build concrete boxes. But some things never leave you. I still cannot sit in an iron chair. The sight of one, with its cold, unyielding frame, makes my throat constrict. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when the humidity is high and the air is still, I wake up to a familiar sound. It isn't a scream or a voice. It's the sound of something wet. Schlick, schlick. I lie perfectly still in my bed, my hand instinctively flying to the amulet I still wear beneath my clothes. I tell myself it's the rain against the window. I tell myself it's the sound of the world breathing. But then I feel it. A phantom chill at the crown of my head. A pressure that shouldn't be there. Molu, a voice whispers in the wind. A voice that smells of salt and old, deep water. The river is still waiting. I never look toward the corner of the room. I never open my eyes until the sun rises, because I know that if I do, I might see him sitting there, waiting for me to grow old, waiting for his bones of glass to find mine once again. The love of a ghost is a terrifying thing. It doesn't understand the concept of goodbye. It only understands forever. And as I listen to the scratching of something sharp against the floorboards, I wonder if the Moulvi's door was ever truly locked, or if it was just held shut by a latch that is slowly, inevitably rusting away. The memory of the fishmonger who loved me is gone, replaced entirely by the bloated thing that wanted to drown me. I look at my reflection in the mirror, and sometimes, for a split second, I see a silver scale glinting on my neck, disappearing the moment I try to touch it. I am marked. I am claimed. And in the silence of the night, I can still hear the iron chair screeching across the floor of a room that no longer exists, moving closer, inch by agonizing inch, until the cold finally reaches my heart. Kaku, I whisper to the empty air, my voice trembling. The only answer is the soft, wet sound of a tongue licking gray lips, echoing from the shadows beneath my bed. He isn't gone. He's just waiting for the lights to go out one last time. He's waiting for the water to rise. He's waiting for me.